The morning sun painted golden streaks across Oakwood Heights as Marcus Johnson adjusted his Canon EOS camera, a cherished 16th birthday gift from his father. The pristine suburban streets, lined with magnificent Victorian and colonial homes, served as the perfect canvas for his latest photography project. At 14, Marcus already displayed an uncanny ability to capture the soul of his subjects through his lens. Standing before a particularly striking Tudor-style mansion, Marcus carefully adjusted his aperture settings. The morning dew still clung to the carefully manicured rose bushes, creating tiny prisms that caught the light. He smiled, remembering his photography mentor's words. The best shots happen in the golden hours. This early morning excursion, though cutting into his weekend sleep, was already proving worthwhile. Marcus had inherited his eye for detail from his mother, a former gallery curator who had passed away 3 years ago. Since then, photography had become more than just a hobby. It was his way of keeping her memory alive. Each click of the shutter felt like a conversation with her, and he could almost hear her gentle suggestions about composition and lighting. As he moved from house to house, Marcus consulted his carefully prepared shot list, his upcoming school project. Architectural heritage of Oakwood Heights required 10 distinct housing styles. But Marcus, ever the perfectionist, planned to photograph 20 different homes to ensure he had the best possible selections. His father had always taught him that excellence required extra effort. A soft breeze rustled through the cherry blossoms, sending pale pink petals dancing through his frame. Marcus quickly adjusted his settings to capture the movement, creating what he knew would be a stunning contrast against the stark white columns of the Greek Revival home before him. Several early morning joggers passed by, some offering friendly waves which he returned with a polite nod, his focus never wavering from his artistic pursuit. His portfolio was already impressive for someone his age. Last month, he'd won the regional youth photography competition with his series on urban wildlife, capturing unexpected moments of nature thriving within the city. The judges had particularly praised his shot of a red-tailed hawk perched atop the courthouse dome, describing it as a perfect marriage of urban architecture and natural majesty. Checking his watch, a habit he picked up from his father, Captain Johnson, Marcus noted he had exactly 45 minutes before he needed to head home for breakfast. His father, despite his demanding schedule at the police department, never missed their Sunday morning pancake tradition. It was their special time together, when they would discuss everything from Marcus's latest photos to his father's most interesting cases. As he framed his next shot, Marcus noticed how the morning light created interesting shadows through the wrought iron fence of a Victorian masterpiece. He switched to his macro lens, wanting to capture the intricate details of the metalwork. The technical precision required for such shots challenged him, but Marcus thrived on pushing his artistic boundaries. Little did he know that just 3 houses down, behind delicate lace curtains, his presence was creating an entirely different kind of picture in someone else's mind. A picture that would set in motion events that would change not just his morning, but the entire community's perspective. Marcus continued his work, lost in the viewfinder's world of light, shadow, and possibility, unaware that his artistic pursuit was about to become something far more significant than a simple school project. Sarah Miller stood at her kitchen window, hands wrapped around her morning coffee mug, its warmth failing to calm her growing unease. Having moved to Oakwood Heights just 2 weeks ago following an unsettling break-in at her previous home, she found herself hyper-aware of unfamiliar faces in her new neighborhood. The young man with the professional camera had been outside for nearly 20 minutes now, methodically moving from house to house. Sarah watched as he paused before the Hendersons' colonial home, his camera pointed at various angles. Her fingers drummed against the ceramic mug as she remembered the neighborhood newsletter she'd received yesterday, a report about recent burglaries where thieves had photographed potential targets. "You're being ridiculous," she whispered to herself, trying to shake off the paranoia. The boy was well dressed in pressed khakis and a light blue button-down shirt, hardly fitting the profile of a criminal. Yet the memory of her previous home's violation, Drawers ransacked, family heirlooms stolen, lingered like a persistent shadow. Sarah had chosen Oakwood Heights specifically for its reputation as a safe haven. The decision to relocate had cost her considerably more than she'd planned, stretching her editor's salary to its limits. But after months of sleepless nights and jumping at every sound, she decided her peace of mind was worth the investment. Moving to the living room window for a better view, Sarah noticed how the boy seemed to be taking particular interest in entry points. Doors, windows, side gates. Her journalist's instinct for observation, honed over 15 years of investigative reporting, kicked in. She began mentally noting details. Approximately 14 or 15 years old, about 5'7", carrying what appeared to be a high-end camera. The previous break-in had taught her a harsh lesson about hesitation. She'd noticed suspicious activity then too. A van driving by multiple times, someone taking pictures, but had dismissed her concerns as paranoid. The police had later confirmed that the burglars had indeed surveilled the neighborhood for days before striking. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. The logical part of her brain argued that she might be overreacting, that there could be a perfectly reasonable explanation. But the part of her that still woke up in cold sweats, remembering the violation of her home, won out. She dialed the non-emergency police number saved in her contacts. As it rang, she watched the boy kneel to capture a low-angle shot of the Victorian house across the street. His movements were precise, almost professional, which somehow made her more uncertain rather than less. Oakwood Heights Police Department, how may I direct your call? A calm voice answered. Sarah took a deep breath, her professional instincts kicking in as she organized her thoughts. Yes, I'd like to report suspicious activity on Maple Avenue. There's someone photographing houses, paying particular attention to entry points and security features. The dispatcher's voice remained steady. Can you describe the individual? Sarah provided the details she'd noted, her reporter's habit of careful observation now serving a different purpose. As she spoke, she saw the young man checking something on his camera's display screen, completely absorbed in his task. We'll send someone to check it out, the dispatcher assured her. Would you like to remain anonymous? Sarah hesitated, then gave her name and new address. If she was wrong, she'd accept the embarrassment. If she was right, she didn't want to hide behind anonymity. After ending the call, she remained by the window, both hoping for and dreading the approaching sirens, unaware that her report was about to lead to an encounter that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her new community. Captain David Johnson leaned back in his office chair, reviewing case files while Officer Jenny Martinez, a promising rookie, sat across from him taking notes on proper protocol. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting stripes across his desk where a framed photo of Marcus stood prominently, his son beaming while holding his first professional camera. Remember, he was saying to Martinez, every call deserves our attention, but we must approach each situation with a clear head and. The crackle of the dispatch radio interrupted his lesson. Dispatch to Captain Johnson. We have a 10-31 reported on Maple Avenue. Caller reports suspicious individual photographing residences. David's hand froze midway through signing a document. Maple Avenue. The same street where Marcus was working on his photography project. He'd dropped his son off there himself barely an hour ago. Subject is described as a young male, approximately 14 to 15 years old, carrying high-end photography equipment. The dispatcher continued, each word making David's chest tighter. Caller reports suspicious attention to entry points and security features. Officer Martinez noticed the subtle change in her mentor's demeanor, the slight straightening of his shoulders, the momentary clench of his jaw. In their 3 months working together, she'd never seen anything break his composed exterior. 10-4, David responded, his voice maintaining its professional calm. I'll handle this personally. He stood, straightening his uniform with practiced precision. Officer Martinez, you're with me. Consider this a practical lesson in community response. As they walked to the patrol car, David's mind raced through the implications. He'd encourage Marcus's photography, seeing how it helped his son process the grief of losing his mother. The project on architectural styles was meant to be Marcus's entry piece for an upcoming youth arts program, one that could lead to a scholarship. "Sir," Martins ventured as they pulled out of the station. "Standard procedure for a suspicious person call usually doesn't require captain oversight." David navigated the morning traffic with measured control. "Sometimes, Martinez, situations aren't what they appear to be. Our job isn't just to respond to calls, it's to understand the full context of every situation we encounter." He thought about the countless conversations he'd had with Marcus about being careful, about how people might misinterpret his actions. They'd practiced what to do if stopped by police. Stay calm, explain clearly, keep your hands visible. No parent should have to have those conversations, but David had learned through 20 years on the force that preparation was essential. "When we arrive," he instructed Martinez, "observe everything before taking action. Notice details that might not make it into the dispatch call. Sometimes what's not reported is as important as what is." The streets of Oakwood Heights passed by, each turn bringing them closer to what David knew would be a defining moment, not just for his son, but for the community he'd sworn to protect and serve. He thought about the caller, probably well-intentioned, unaware they were reporting a police captain's son pursuing his passion for art. Through the windshield, he could already see Marcus in the distance, completely absorbed in his photography. Pride and concern roared in David's chest as he watched his son adjust his camera settings with familiar precision. "Martinez," he said quietly as they approached, "watch carefully. Sometimes the best lessons in law enforcement come from the cases that challenge our assumptions." The patrol car slowed to a stop, and David took a deep breath, preparing himself for a moment that would require both his roles, father and captain, to work in perfect harmony. The morning light had reached that perfect golden hour photographers dream about when Marcus noticed something extraordinary. A monarch butterfly, its wings catching the sunlight like stained glass, had landed on the burnished brass doorknob of the old Victorian house. The contrast was breathtaking, nature's delicate artwork against man's crafted metal. Mrs. Eleanor Matthews, a retired art teacher who'd lived in the neighborhood for 40 years, was tending to her prized roses when she noticed Marcus's intense concentration. She watched as he slowly, carefully, adjusted his position to capture the perfect angle, his movements precise to avoid startling the butterfly. "Young man," she called softly, her curiosity piqued by his obvious expertise with the camera. "Would you mind showing me what's caught your attention?" Marcus looked up, breaking into a warm smile he'd inherited from his mother. "Of course, Mrs. Matthews." He remembered her from the neighborhood bake sales his father always volunteered them for. "I've just caught something amazing." As patrol cars quietly turned onto the street, Marcus was showing Mrs. Matthews the display screen of his camera. "See how the light catches the butterfly's wings," he explained enthusiastically. "And the way the brass doorknob creates this beautiful golden backdrop. It's like nature and architecture having a conversation." Mrs. Matthews adjusted her glasses, genuinely impressed. "My goodness, that's remarkable. You have quite an eye, young man. Reminds me of the work we used to feature in our school's art gallery." The sound of car doors closing finally drew their attention. 2 police vehicles had parked nearby, their presence oddly unobtrusive without flashing lights or sirens. Marcus felt a moment of confusion until he recognized the familiar stride of his father emerging from one of the cars. Officer Martinez stepped out, taking in the scene before her, a young photographer enthusiastically sharing his work with an elderly neighbor, the morning sun casting everything in a peaceful glow. Nothing like the suspicious activity they'd been called about. "Dad?" Marcus called out, his face lighting up with surprise. "Are you doing neighborhood rounds? You've got to see this shot I just got." Captain Johnson approached with measured steps, noting Sarah Miller watching from her window, the concerned citizen who'd made the call. He could see the moment confusion crossed her face as she witnessed the warm interaction unfolding. "Mrs. Matthews," Captain Johnson greeted the elderly neighbor with a familiar smile. "I see you've met my son, the photographer." "David," Mrs. Matthews exclaimed. "I should have known he was yours. He has Claire's artistic eye." She patted Marcus's shoulder approvingly, referring to his late mother. Marcus, still excited about his capture, turned the camera screen toward his father. "Look at this composition, Dad. Remember how Mom always said that sometimes the best photos find you, rather than the other way around?" The other officers, who'd known Marcus since he was small, gathered around to admire the photo. The moment had transformed from a potential confrontation into something entirely different, a celebration of art and community. Sarah Miller, watching from her window, felt her chest tighten as realization dawned. The scene unfolding before her was far from what she'd imagined when making the call. Instead of catching a potential criminal, she was witnessing a father's pride, a community's warmth, and an artist's passion. The butterfly, undisturbed by the gathering, remained on the doorknob, its wings still catching the morning light, as if waiting for everyone to appreciate the moment it had helped create. Sarah Miller's feet felt like lead as she walked down her front steps, her reporter's notebook clutched unnecessarily in her hand, an old habit that surfaced whenever she felt nervous. The morning scene before her was nothing like what she'd expected when making the call, and everything about it challenged her recent paranoia. Captain Johnson noticed her approach first, his professional instincts catching the subtle signs of her discomfort. He gave Marcus a gentle pat on the shoulder, whispering something that made the boy nod and continue showing his photographs to Mrs. Matthews and Officer Martinez. "Good morning," he called out to Sarah, his voice carrying the kind of warmth that immediately put people at ease. "I'm Captain David Johnson. I believe you had some concerns about suspicious activity." Sarah's cheeks flushed as she watched Marcus expertly adjust his camera settings, clearly explaining some technical detail to his captivated audience. I'm Sarah Miller. I just moved here, and with the recent reports of break-ins." Her voice trailed off as Marcus looked up, flashing a smile that carried no hint of resentment. "Dad, come look at this series," Marcus called out, his enthusiasm infectious. "I caught the whole Victorian row in the perfect morning light. It's exactly what my photography teacher was talking about with architectural shadows." Captain Johnson turned to Sarah with an understanding smile. "Would you like to see what brought you to call us this morning? I think you might appreciate the artist's perspective." There was no accusation in his voice, no hint of judgment. Sarah found herself nodding, drawn into the small group gathered around Marcus's camera. As the young photographer flipped through his morning's work, she felt her anxiety dissolving, replaced by genuine admiration. "This is incredible," she breathed, looking at a shot that captured her own home's facade in a way that made it look like something out of an architectural magazine. "You saw this from the street?" Marcus nodded eagerly. "It's all about the angles and timing. See how the morning light creates these long shadows. They tell a story about the building structure. My mom used to say that every house has a story to tell, if you just look at it the right way." Marcus is preparing these for both his school project and a youth photography exhibition, Captain Johnson explained, pride evident in his voice. He's already won several competitions. Officer Martinez, who had been quietly observing, chimed in. "The department actually used one of his photos for our community outreach brochure last year. That shot of the downtown sunset during the Winter Festival. That was Marcus's work." Sarah felt a familiar spark, the same one she got when discovering there was more to a story than met the eye. Would you mind telling me more about your project?" she asked Marcus. "I'm actually an editor for the local magazine, and we've been looking for fresh perspectives on community features." Mrs. Matthews beamed at this development. "Oh, you must see his portfolio. His eye for detail reminds me of his mother's work in the art world." The morning sun had risen higher now, transforming what could have been a tense confrontation into something unexpectedly beautiful. Sarah watched as Marcus showed her more photographs, each one revealing not just his talent, but his deep appreciation for the community she'd so recently joined. Captain Johnson stood back slightly, watching the interaction with quiet satisfaction. In his 20 years of law enforcement, he learned that sometimes the best way to bridge misunderstandings was to let people discover the truth for themselves. The next hour unfolded like a masterclass in photography as Marcus, growing more animated with each image, guided Sarah through his creative process. They'd moved to Mrs. Matthews' wraparound porch, where the elderly teacher had insisted on serving her famous lavender lemonade to the impromptu gathering. "See this shadow pattern?" Marcus explained, scrolling through his camera's display. "I waited 15 minutes for the sun to hit just right. It's all about patience." His fingers moved deftly across the camera settings as he showed Sarah how slight adjustments could transform an ordinary scene into something extraordinary. Captain Johnson watched from his position by the porch railing, having dismissed the other officers except Martinez, who stayed to take notes about community engagement. He noticed how Sarah leaned forward with genuine interest, her journalist's instinct for a good story evident in her thoughtful questions. "What made you choose architecture as your subject?" Sarah asked, sipping her lemonade. The morning's earlier anxiety felt like a distant memory now, replaced by professional curiosity. Marcus's eyes lit up. "Actually, it started with this blueprint I found in Mom's old art supplies." He pulled out a carefully folded paper from his camera bag. She was fascinated by how buildings tell stories about the people who live in them. "This neighborhood has houses from 6 different decades. Each one reflects a different piece of our community's history." Sarah unfolded the blueprint with reverent hands, recognizing it as a detailed drawing of the historic library downtown. "Your mother drew this." Claire was our town's most beloved architectural photographer. Mrs. Matthews interjected softly. "She had a way of capturing not just buildings, but their souls." Captain Johnson stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. Marcus inherited her eye for detail and her ability to find beauty in unexpected places. "Dad," Marcus said suddenly, pulling up another image on his camera. "Remember that story Mom used to tell about the hidden window at the Peterson house?" "I found it." The photograph showed an elegant stained glass window, nearly obscured by ivy, its colors brilliant in the morning light. Sarah found herself drawn into their shared memories and passion for visual storytelling. As a journalist, she recognized the power of narrative, but seeing it through Marcus's lens offered a fresh perspective. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "the magazine's upcoming issue focuses on local heritage. We've been looking for a fresh angle on the architectural history of Oakwood Heights." She glanced at Captain Johnson, including him in the conversation. "Would you be interested in contributing some of your photographs, Marcus, with a feature about your perspective on the neighborhood?" The excitement on Marcus's face was infectious. "Really? Like a professional photography assignment?" "More like a collaboration," Sarah smiled. "Your images tell stories that words alone can't capture." Officer Martinez, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "The department's community outreach program might be interested in this too. We've been wanting to showcase positive connections in the neighborhood." Mrs. Matthews clapped her hands together. "Why don't we make this the first of many Saturday morning photography sessions? My porch is always open, and the lemonade is always fresh." Captain Johnson watched as plans began to form, seeing the invisible threads of community weaving stronger with each shared idea. What had started as a misunderstanding was transforming into something valuable, a bridge between different perspectives, built on understanding and mutual respect. As the morning sun climbed higher, the porch became more than just a gathering place. It became a symbol of how fear could transform into friendship, suspicion into support, and misunderstanding into opportunity. The Oakwood Heights Gallery had never seen such a diverse crowd for an opening night. 3 months after that fateful morning, the space buzzed with energy as people gathered for the unveiling of Through Young Eyes, a community in focus, Marcus Johnson's first solo exhibition. Sarah Miller stood near the entrance, watching visitors' reactions with satisfaction. The magazine article she'd written about Marcus had sparked unexpected interest, not just locally but from national photography circles. as the gallery's newest board member, a position she'd been offered after coordinating this exhibition. She felt a particular pride in how the evening was unfolding. "The lighting is perfect." Marcus fussed with his camera strap, a habit when nervous. He wore a new blazer, a gift from Mrs. Matthews, who'd insisted a professional photographer needed proper exhibition attire. The 14-year-old artist had spent weeks selecting and arranging the photographs, each one telling part of their neighborhood's story. Captain Johnson greeted guests in his dress uniform, beaming with pride. He paused before a striking image. His own police station at dawn, the American flag casting intricate shadows across the building's facade. Below it, a plaque read, "Guardians, dedicated to those who protect and serve our community." "You've captured something special here," said Professor Chen from the State University's Fine Arts Department, studying the series showing the evolution of architectural styles along Maple Avenue. "These photographs tell stories within stories." The exhibition space had been transformed into a journey through time and perspective. One wall featured the historic homes that had first caught Marcus's eye that spring morning. Another showcased the people who made these buildings come alive. Mrs. Matthews tending her roses, children playing on Victorian porches, elderly couples in rocking chairs sharing evening conversations. Sarah's favorite section was titled First Impressions, featuring her own house photographed at different times of day. The series began with a shot from that pivotal morning, but transformed through the seasons, showing how the same place could be seen in countless different ways. "I never thought my call to the police would lead to this," she admitted to Mrs. Matthews, who'd become a regular at their Saturday morning photography sessions. "Sometimes the best stories come from our mistakes." The centerpiece of the exhibition was a large photograph that captured the entire neighborhood during a sunset block party organized to celebrate Marcus's first magazine feature. The image showed people from all walks of life sharing food, laughter, and stories on blankets spread across front lawns. Officer Martinez, now promoted to community liaison, led a group of young aspiring photographers through the gallery. The police department had partnered with the local youth center to create a photography program, inspired by how Marcus's art had strengthened community bonds. "Your mother would be so proud," Captain Johnson whispered to Marcus, both of them pausing before a small, intimate corner of the exhibition dedicated to Claire's architectural drawings alongside Marcus's modern interpretations of the same buildings. As evening fell, the gallery lights created warm pools of illumination around each photograph. Sarah watched Marcus explaining his techniques to an enthusiastic group of students, his initial shyness replaced by confident enthusiasm. She thought about how different this scene was from what she'd imagined that spring morning, watching him through her window. The exhibition had become more than just a display of photographs. It was a testament to how fear could transform into understanding, suspicion into appreciation, and misunderstanding into connection. Each image on the walls told not just the story of a building or a moment, but of a community learning to see itself through new eyes. 1 year later, Marcus stood at his bedroom window, reviewing photos on his new professional camera, a Sweet 16 gift funded by the proceeds from his exhibition sales. The morning light painted Oakwood Heights in familiar golden hues, but everything else had changed. Below, Sarah Miller was setting up chairs in her front yard for the first annual Oakwood Heights Photography Workshop, an event she and Marcus had conceived during one of their weekly mentoring sessions. Her journey from newcomer to community cornerstone had been as remarkable as Marcus's artistic evolution. "Your first students will be here soon," Captain Johnson called from the doorway, already in his weekend casual attire. "Need help carrying your equipment?" Marcus grinned, gathering his teaching materials, lesson plans he'd developed with help from Mrs. Matthews, who'd insisted that her 40 years of teaching experience might come in handy. "Did you see the piece in the National Photography magazine?" he asked, picking up the glossy publication where his exhibition had been featured in a spread about young artists making social impact. Across the street, Officer Martinez was helping Sarah arrange portfolios, examples of work from the youth photography program that had blossomed at the community center. The program, initially sparked by Marcus's story, had already helped 3 teenagers earn art school scholarships. "Remember to capture the light in people, not just places," Mrs. Matthews advised as she arrived with her signature lavender lemonade, repeating Claire's words that had become something of a mantra in their photography sessions. Her front porch remained the unofficial gathering spot for their growing community of artists. The workshop participants began arriving, a diverse group ranging from curious neighbors to serious photography students. Among them was Tommy Chen, Professor Chen's son, who'd been inspired to pursue photography after seeing Marcus's exhibition. He carried his father's vintage camera, restored specifically for this occasion. Sarah watched Marcus greeting each arrival with natural confidence, so different from the nervous young artist she'd mistakenly reported a year ago. Her upcoming book, Looking Closer: How Photography Changed Our Community, sat ready for pre-order on 3 major platforms. Who would have thought, she mused to Captain Johnson, that one morning could change so many lives? He smiled, watching his son demonstrate proper camera handling to an enthusiastic 8-year-old girl. Claire always said art had a way of bringing truth into focus. The workshop began with Marcus sharing the butterfly photograph, the image that had captured more than just a moment. It had captured the beginning of transformation. Now framed in the community center's entrance, it served as a reminder that beauty could emerge from the most unexpected situations. As morning sunlight streamed across eager faces and raised hands, Marcus felt a deep sense of purpose. His mother's artistic legacy lived on not just through his photographs, but through the connections they created. Every weekend, new stories emerged through different lenses, each one adding to the rich tapestry of their community. Sarah caught Marcus's eye and gave him a warm smile, the kind that made the memory of her anxious call feel like a lifetime ago. In her hands, she held the proposal for next year's expanded workshop series, already approved by the City Council. The final activity of the morning involved all participants gathering for a group photo. As they assembled on Sarah's lawn, Captain Johnson noticed a familiar sight, a monarch butterfly, perhaps a descendant of the one from that fateful morning, landing on Mrs. Matthews' rose bush. Marcus captured the moment perfectly. Morning light, genuine smiles, and that touch of serendipity that turned a photograph into a story. It was more than just an image. It was proof that sometimes the best views come after changing how we look at things.